My husband said I should stop wasting money on my sick dog. When he fell ill, I told him, now you know how it feels to be disposable. The silence in the car was heavier than any sound I had ever known. It was a thick, suffocating blanket woven from grief and the lingering scent of antiseptic from the vet's office. Beside me, in the passenger seat, Leo stared out the window, his jaw tight, his posture rigid. He hadn't said a word since I'd walked out of that little room, my face a mess of tears and my arms aching with an emptiness that felt physical, a phantom weight where my best friend Max should have been. For 12 years, Max had been my shadow, my confidant, my furry, slobbery, unconditionally loving anchor in the choppy waters of my life. Now, he was just a memory, and a bill for euthanasia that Leo had paid with a sigh of theatrical impatience. I drove, my knuckles white on the steering wheel, each turn of the tires on the asphalt a fresh scrape against my raw nerves. I wanted him to say something, anything. I wanted him to reach over and put his hand on my arm. I wanted him to say he was sorry for my loss, that Max was a good boy, that he would miss him too. He did none of those things. When we finally pulled into our driveway, he broke the silence, not with comfort, but with a cold, hard pronouncement that shattered the last fragile piece of my heart. Well, that's that, he said, unbuckling his seatbelt with a decisive click. Finally, now we can stop wasting money on that animal. The words hung in the air, sharp and cruel as shards of glass. I couldn't breathe. I turned to look at him, my vision blurred by a fresh surge of tears. Wasting money. That's what Max's life had been to him. 12 years of loyalty, of wet-nosed greetings at the door, of a warm body at the foot of the bed on cold nights. All of it, in the end, reduced to a line item on a budget he found inconvenient. The final months had been hard. I knew that. Max's kidneys were failing. There were special diets, expensive medications, weekly subcutaneous fluid injections I learned to administer myself, my hands shaking as I pierced his skin, whispering apologies and promises. To me, it was an act of love, a sacred duty. To my husband, it was a waste. A strange, cold clarity cut through my grief. It was a feeling I'd had before, fleetingly, over the years of our marriage. A sudden, stark realization that the man I had promised my life to was a stranger. But this time, it was different. It wasn't fleeting. It was a tectonic shift, the ground beneath my feet cracking open to reveal a chasm I could no longer ignore. He saw the shift in my expression, the way my sorrow was hardening into something else. He misinterpreted it as weakness, as the beginning of a hysterical breakdown he could manage and dismiss. Clara, don't start, he warned, his voice laced with that familiar, patronizing tone. It was a dog, an old, sick dog. This is practical. We can finally start saving for a real vacation. Maybe fix the deck. This is a good thing financially. That's when I remembered. My phone. It was nestled in the cup holder, its screen dark. An hour earlier, sitting in the vet's waiting room while Max was in the back having his catheter placed, I had felt a knot of dread. I knew Leo's patience was worn thin. I knew he would say something dismissive, something that would cut me when I was at my most vulnerable. I'd had this vague idea that I would record him just to have proof of his coldness, something to play for a marriage counselor later to show her what I was dealing with. A desperate, pathetic little attempt to be validated. So, I had pressed the record button on the voice memo app and let it run. I had completely forgotten about it in the haze of saying goodbye to Max, but now, it was still recording. It was capturing every heartless, pragmatic word falling from my husband's lips. A hidden advantage. An unseen observer in the theater of my life's greatest tragedy. I didn't let my eyes flicker towards it. I kept my gaze locked on his. A waste? I whispered, my voice trembling not with sadness anymore, but with a nascent rage that was starting to burn away the fog. He was my family, Leo. He scoffed, a short, ugly sound. Oh, please, don't be so dramatic. He was a dependent, an expense, a very, very expensive one. I've been looking at the statements. Thousands. We've spent thousands over the last 6 months trying to keep that animal alive. For what? A few more weeks of him stumbling around the house, peeing on the rug? He was getting out of the car now, grabbing his briefcase from the back. He thought the conversation was over. He thought he had delivered his final, logical verdict, and I would simply have to accept it. But the rage was building in me, a hot, roaring fire. I got out of the car and followed him up the walkway. You have no idea what you're talking about, I said, my voice rising. You have no heart, no empathy. He spun around at the front door, his face a mask of irritation, and then the mask slipped. It was replaced by something else, something smug and cruel and triumphant. He thought he had won. He thought the source of his financial annoyance was gone, and he had finally put me in my place. His belief in his own victory made him careless. Empathy? He sneered. Let me tell you about empathy, Clara. Empathy is understanding that you don't throw good money after bad. That dog was a bad investment from the start. A rescue, for God's sake. You never know what you're getting. I'm just surprised he lasted this long, especially with how sick he's been. He paused, a flicker of something dark in his eyes. Honestly, I thought all that trouble with his stomach a year ago would have been the end of it. It's a miracle he bounced back from that one. My blood ran cold. The stomach trouble. A year ago, Max had been violently, inexplicably ill. The vet had been baffled. He'd had severe gastrointestinal distress, lethargy, loss of appetite. We'd run countless tests, but nothing was definitive. They'd called it a severe atypical gastritis. He'd almost died. It had taken weeks of intensive care and a bland diet for him to recover. Leo had been helpful then, or so I thought. He had been the one to clean up the messes when I was too exhausted to move. He had been the one to offer to feed Max his special food, telling me to rest. He had been the one who'd found Max collapsed in the garden. My mind raced, connecting dots I hadn't even known were there. The way Leo always insisted on preparing Max's food bowl. The way Max had started to shy away from him in that last year. A subtle change I had attributed to his age and pain. The open bag of fertilizer in the garage that Leo had sworn he'd keep sealed. "What did you do?" The question came out as a choked whisper. He actually laughed. It was a chilling, arrogant sound. He thought I was accusing him out of grief-fueled paranoia. He thought he was untouchable. "What did I do?" he repeated, shaking his head with mock pity. "I lived with a woman who loved a dog more than her own husband. A woman who would rather spend our retirement savings on vet bills than on our future. I showed incredible patience, that's what I did. I tolerated it for years. You should be thanking me for my restraint." He unlocked the door and stepped inside, leaving me standing on the porch, the world tilting on its axis. He didn't confess, not outright, but he didn't have to. The gloating pride in his voice, the specific reference to the illness a year ago, the triumphant look in his eyes. It was a confession of the soul, if not of the deed. He was proud of what he had gotten away with. He was proud of his cruelty. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, the cold seeping into my bones. Then, a survival instinct I didn't know I possessed kicked in. I couldn't let him know I suspected. I couldn't let him know about the phone. I had to play the part he expected. I stumbled inside, collapsing onto the entryway bench, burying my face in my hands and letting out a loud, theatrical sob. It wasn't entirely fake. The grief for Max was still a raw, open wound, but now it was tangled with a terrifying, cold fury. I was performing my grief for an audience of one, my tormentor. "I can't believe he's gone," I wailed, the words muffled by my hands. "I just can't." Leo stood over me for a moment, and I could feel his disdain like a physical force. "Look, I have an early flight tomorrow," he said, his voice devoid of any warmth. "I'm going to pack and get some sleep. You do whatever it is you need to do." He walked up the stairs without a backward glance. He was leaving on a 2-day business trip. The timing couldn't have been more perfect. He was giving me space, thinking it would allow me to process my grief and accept his cold, hard logic. He had no idea he was giving me a head start. I waited until I heard the click of our bedroom door shutting. My hands were shaking so violently I could barely function. I walked back out to the car, my movements stiff and robotic. I reached in and grabbed my phone. My thumb hovered over the screen. The little red bar and the timer were still active. 1 hour and 17 minutes. I pressed stop and saved the file. My heart was pounding in my ears. I had it. I had his coldness, his financial obsession, his sneering dismissal of my love for Max. And I had his gloating, his pride, his thinly veiled admission. It was all there, captured in a digital file. I stumbled back into the house and locked the door, leaning against it as my legs finally gave out. I slid down to the floor, pulling my knees to my chest, the cold wood a stark contrast to the fire in my gut. Max wasn't just gone. He had been taken from me, slowly, methodically, cruelly. And the man sleeping upstairs, the man I had shared my life with, was his killer. The first person I called was my Aunt Carol. She was my mother's younger sister, a retired nurse with a no-nonsense attitude and a heart as big as the sky. She had always been my safe harbor. When I was a teenager struggling with anxiety, she was the one who taught me breathing exercises. When my mother passed away, she was the one who held me and let me cry for hours. She lived an hour away, but when she heard my voice, a strangled, broken thing, she didn't hesitate. "I'm on my way," she said. "Don't you move. Lock the doors. I'll be there as soon as I can." While I waited, I sat at the kitchen table, the silence of the house a screaming accusation. Every creak of the floorboards, every hum of the refrigerator was a reminder of Max's absence. I kept expecting to hear the click-clack of his nails on the hardwood, to feel a wet nose nudge my hand. The emptiness was a physical presence. I made myself a cup of tea, my hands still shaking. I couldn't cry anymore. The tears had been replaced by a chilling, resolute calm. I was no longer just grieving. I was preparing for war. When Aunt Carol arrived, she took one look at my face and pulled me into a fierce hug. "Oh, honey," she whispered, her voice thick with concern. "I'm so sorry about Max. So sorry." I held on to her, the first warmth I had felt all day. I led her to the kitchen table and, without a word, placed my phone between us. "I need you to listen to this," I said, my voice flat. I recorded it in the car and on the porch. I pressed play. We sat in silence as the recording filled the quiet kitchen. First, my muffled sobs, then Leo's cold, pragmatic voice. Finally, now we can stop wasting money on that animal. I watched Aunt Carol's face. Her expression tightened, her eyes narrowing. She listened to his entire speech about finances, his dismissal of my grief. Then came the second part, the confrontation on the porch, his sneering tone, his reference to Max's illness a year prior. "I'm just surprised he lasted this long. I thought all that trouble with his stomach a year ago would have been the end of it." When the recording finished, Carol didn't say anything for a long moment. She just stared at the phone, her knuckles white where she gripped her mug. Then she looked at me, her eyes blazing with a protective fury I hadn't seen since a boy had broken my heart in high school. "That son of a bitch," she said, her voice a low growl. "That absolute monster. He's not just cruel, Clara. He's admitting it. He's proud of it." The validation was like a dam breaking. The self-doubt I had been wrestling with, was I crazy? Was I misinterpreting? Was this just grief making me paranoid? Washed away in the force of her certainty. "I think he was poisoning him, Carol," I whispered, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. "For over a year. I think he tried to kill him a year ago and failed, and has been doing it slowly ever since, making his kidney failure worse." She reached across the table and took my hands. hands. Her own were steady and warm. "I believe you," she said, her voice firm. 100%, and we are going to make him pay for this. That night, I didn't sleep in my marital bed. I slept in the guest room with the door locked. Aunt Carol slept on the sofa downstairs, a silent guardian. The next morning, while Leo was in the air flying to his conference, we began to dismantle his life and reclaim mine. The first call was to a lawyer. Aunt Carol had a friend whose daughter, a woman named Anya Sharma, was a therapist specializing in trauma and narcissistic abuse. We called her first, and Dr. Sharma, after hearing a brief, frantic summary of the situation, gave me the name of a lawyer she trusted implicitly. "Her name is Ms. Albright," she'd said. "She's a shark. She's exactly who you need." Ms. Albright's office was in a sleek, modern building downtown. It felt cold and impersonal, but the woman herself was anything but. She was in her 50s, with sharp eyes, an impeccably tailored suit, and an air of competence that was immediately reassuring. I was a wreck. I had barely slept. I felt fragile and exposed. I sat in a plush chair opposite her large mahogany desk, with Aunt Carol beside me for support. I told her everything. I played her the recording. I told her about Max's mysterious illness a year ago, about Leo's control over the finances, about his subtle put-downs and gaslighting over the years. I felt like I was unraveling, laying out the ugly, tangled threads of my marriage for a stranger to inspect. Ms. Albright listened without interruption, her expression unreadable. She took notes on a yellow legal pad, her pen scratching rhythmically. When I was finished, I felt empty and exhausted. She looked at me, her gaze direct and unflinching. "First," she said, her voice crisp and clear, "I want you to know that I believe you. What you have experienced is a profound betrayal and a calculated campaign of psychological abuse. That recording is a powerful piece of evidence. His words demonstrate a shocking lack of empathy and a clear motive of financial gain." She leaned forward. "The implication that he harmed your dog is more than just an implication. It's a boast. He feels untouchable. We're going to show him that he is not." She laid out a plan with breathtaking efficiency. First, a petition for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences and cruel and inhuman treatment. Second, an immediate motion for an ex parte order of protection, which would legally remove Leo from the house upon his return. Third, a motion to freeze all our joint assets to prevent him from hiding or squandering them. "But there's another step we need to consider," she said, her tone becoming more serious. "The animal cruelty. What he did to your dog is a crime, Clara. In this state, it's a felony. A conviction on that charge would give us enormous leverage in the divorce proceeding, but it would mean involving the police. It would mean turning this from a private matter into a public one. Are you prepared for that?" I looked at Aunt Carol, who gave me a firm, encouraging nod. I thought of Max, of his trust and his unconditional love. I thought of him getting weaker day by day, while the man who was supposed to protect us was slowly killing him. "Yes," I said, my voice stronger than I expected. "I want to do it for Max. He deserves justice." Ms. Albright nodded, a flicker of approval in her eyes. "Good," she said. "Then we have work to do." That afternoon, we went to the police station. It was a sterile, intimidating place. I felt small and powerless, but Ms. Albright walked in like she owned the building, her presence commanding respect. We were directed to a small, windowless interview room to wait for a detective. A young officer brought us coffee in styrofoam cups. It tasted bitter. After about 20 minutes, a man in a rumpled suit entered the room. He introduced himself as Detective Miller. He looked tired and skeptical, like a man who had heard every kind of story imaginable. I felt my resolve begin to waver. He opened a notebook. "So," he said, his voice flat, "Ms. Albright tells me you have a complaint against your husband regarding the death of your dog." The way he said it, "death of your dog," made it sound so trivial. Ms. Albright immediately took control. "Detective," she said, her tone sharp, "my client is here to report a felony, specifically aggravated animal cruelty resulting in the death of a companion animal. We have reason to believe her husband, Leo Vance, intentionally and systematically poisoned his dog over a period of at least a year. We also have a recording of Mr. Vance all but confessing to this, which we are prepared to share with you." Detective Miller's posture changed slightly. He looked from Ms. Albright to me. I took a deep breath and, with Ms. Albright's encouragement, I told him the story again. I tried to keep my voice steady, to present the facts as clearly as I could, just as Ms. Albright had coached me. When I was done, I played the recording for him. He listened intently, his head cocked to one side. As Leo's sneering voice filled the small room, I saw the skepticism in the detective's eyes fade, replaced by a look of grim focus. "Okay," he said when it was over. "Okay, that's something." He tapped his pen on his notebook. "The recording is good. It shows motive and a level of malice that's disturbing, but his words are intentionally vague. A good defense attorney will argue he was just being a callous jerk, not confessing to a crime. To make this stick, we need more. We need physical evidence." Ms. Albright had already prepared for this. "We've already been in contact with the veterinary clinic," she said. "They have preserved the dog's body, as is standard for a short period following euthanasia. We would like to request that the department secure the remains and order a full toxicology panel." I flinched. The thought of Max's body, which I had last seen wrapped in a soft blue blanket, being subjected to a cold clinical examination was horrifying, but I knew it was necessary. I nodded my assent, my stomach churning. Detective Miller looked at me with a glimmer of sympathy. "This won't be easy, ma'am," he said. "Exhuming a pet, getting these kinds of warrants, it takes time, and it can be rough emotionally. But if what you're saying is true, we need to do it." Leaving the police station, I felt a strange mix of terror and relief. The wheels of justice were turning, but they were large, slow, and frightening. The next 24 hours hours were a blur of paperwork. I signed the divorce petition. I wrote a detailed affidavit for the order of protection, chronicling years of emotional manipulation and culminating in the events of the past few days. Every word felt like pouring salt on a wound, but Ms. Albright insisted on the importance of a thorough record. While I worked with the lawyer, Aunt Carol began her own investigation. She became my archivist, my memory keeper. We started a new, meticulous process of evidence compilation. We went through years of financial statements, printing out every vet bill, every pet store receipt. We highlighted the massive expenses from Max's illness a year ago and the steady draining costs of the past 6 months. Then, Carol had an idea. Let's look for things that don't belong, she said. We logged into our shared Amazon account. We scrolled back month by month. Leo was usually meticulous about using his own account for personal purchases, but sometimes, for convenience, he'd use ours. And there it was, 13 months ago, just 2 weeks before Max got so violently ill. An order for a 10-pound bag of granular weed and feed, a brand known to be highly toxic to pets. I remembered that. He'd said he was going to do a big treatment on the lawn, but our lawn was tiny, and we used a lawn service. We never did our own yard work. He never used this, I said, my voice barely a whisper. I remember seeing the bag in the garage for months. It just sat there. We kept digging. We found other, smaller purchases, strange cleaning supplies he insisted on buying, claiming they were more effective. We saved every receipt, every order confirmation. We created a timeline. A huge piece of poster board was spread across the dining room table. We mapped out everything. The date of the fertilizer purchase, the date Max first got sick, every vet visit with notes on his symptoms, vomiting, lethargy, disorientation. We cross-referenced it with Leo's travel schedule. A pattern began to emerge. Max's worst episodes often seemed to happen when Leo had been home for a few days straight, and he'd often improve slightly when Leo was away on business trips. It was a sickening, horrifying tapestry of cruelty. While we worked, I started seeing Dr. Anya Sharma. Our first session was raw. I mostly just cried, overwhelmed by the sheer scale of the betrayal. She didn't offer easy platitudes. She just listened, creating a space where my grief and my rage could coexist. What you are feeling is not an overreaction, she told me, her voice calm and steady. Your trust has been violated on a fundamental level. Your home, which should be your sanctuary, was made unsafe. Your love for your pet was used as a weapon against you both. You are a victim of profound psychological abuse. She taught me grounding techniques, how to focus on my breath when the panic rose, how to name 5 things I could see, 4 I could feel, 3 I could hear, to pull myself out of a spiral of traumatic memories. These were not just tools for therapy. She was preparing me for the fight ahead. He will try to paint you as unstable, she warned. His defense will be to attack your credibility. He will use your history of anxiety against you. We need to build you a fortress of resilience, brick by brick. On the day Leo was due to fly home, Ms. Albright got the call. The judge had signed the order of protection. A sheriff's deputy would meet Leo at the airport and serve him. He would be informed that he was barred from the marital home and from contacting me in any way. He would be escorted to the house to retrieve a few personal necessities, and then he would have to leave. I wasn't home when it happened. Aunt Carol had insisted I go with her to her house. We waited, my stomach in knots. Around 4 p.m. my phone rang. It was Leo. He was violating the order already. I looked at Carol, my eyes wide with panic. She pointed at the phone and mouthed, "Don't answer. Let it go to voicemail." He called 3 more times, back to back. Then a text message came through. "Clara, what the hell is this? You've lost your mind. Call me now." Then another. "A restraining order? Are you insane? After everything I do for you? You're going to regret this." Then the voicemail notification popped up. His voice was cold, furious. "Clara, you have made a monumental mistake. A divorce? Fine. But this public humiliation? Accusing me of, I don't even want to say it. You are unstable. You are a hysterical, grieving woman who has lost touch with reality. And I will prove it in court. You will get nothing. You will be left with nothing." The retaliation had begun. It was swift and brutal. Within days, I received a formal response from his lawyer. It was a work of fiction, a masterpiece of character assassination. It painted me as a mentally fragile, vindictive woman, prone to flights of fancy and paranoid accusations. It cited my history of treatment for anxiety as proof of my instability. It claimed I was irrationally devastated by the necessary and humane decision to euthanize a suffering animal and was lashing out at the nearest target. It was gaslighting, weaponized, and legalized. His lawyer argued that the order of protection was baseless and demanded it be rescinded. They also filed a motion to have me psychologically evaluated. Then came the financial pressure. I went to the grocery store and my debit card was declined. I tried a credit card. Declined. I called the bank. Leo, as the primary account holder on our joint accounts, had frozen everything. He had drained our savings account, transferring the money to a private account of his own. He had left me with less than $100 in my own name. I stood in the bank parking lot, the phone shaking in my hand, a wave of sheer panic washing over me. This was his strategy: discredit me, isolate me, and starve me out. He thought I would crumble. He thought I would come crawling back, begging for forgiveness, willing to drop all the charges in exchange for financial security. He had underestimated me, and he had grossly underestimated Aunt Carol. When I called her, sobbing, she was furious. "That's it," she said. "War chest time." She transferred a significant amount of money into my personal account that same day. "This is a loan," she said firmly, "and when you take that bastard for everything he's worth, you can pay me me back. Until then, you will want for nothing. You focus on the fight. The emotional coercion started next. Leo couldn't contact me directly, so he weaponized his family. His mother, Eleanor, called me. Her tone was syrupy sweet, dripping with false concern. "Clara, darling," she began. "I was so shocked to hear what's happened. Leo is just beside himself. This is all a terrible misunderstanding, isn't it? Your grief over the little dog. It's making you not think clearly." I stayed silent, holding the phone away from my ear, letting her talk. "He loves you, Clara. He's willing to forgive you for this public display. If you just drop these awful, crazy accusations, we can all put this behind us. He'll even give you a generous settlement in the divorce. A clean break. Isn't that what you want?" The offer hung in the air. "Take the money and shut up. Be the crazy, hysterical woman, and we'll pay you to go away quietly." "No, Eleanor," I said, my voice cold and steady. "That is not what I want. What I want is justice." I hung up the phone. I blocked her number and the numbers of his entire family. The weeks that followed were a slow, grinding crawl through the legal system. Detective Miller was true to his word. He secured a warrant for Max's remains. The day they performed the necropsy was one of the hardest of my life. I stayed at home, pacing the rooms, unable to settle. I felt like I was betraying Max all over again, subjecting his peaceful rest to this cold, scientific violation. Dr. Sharma had prepared me for it. "This is an act of love, Clara," she had said in our session. "It is the last act of advocacy you can perform for him. You are seeking the truth on his behalf. Let that be your anchor." 2 weeks later, Detective Miller called. The wait had been excruciating. "We got the toxicology report back," he said, his voice grim. "You were right." He explained the findings. They had found significant levels of ethylene glycol in Max's kidney tissues. Antifreeze. It wasn't the fertilizer I had suspected, but something far more common, more accessible. It's sweet, attractive to animals, and the symptoms of ingestion perfectly matched Max's 2 major bouts of illness. The initial, acute phase a year ago, the vomiting, the lethargy, and the chronic phase that followed, leading to progressive, irreversible kidney failure. The levels in his system indicate repeated low-dose exposure over a long period of time, Miller explained. "It's a classic, horrific case of chronic poisoning. The vet who treated him a year ago would have had no reason to suspect it without a specific tip. It mimics so many other things." It was the evidentiary turning point, the concrete scientific proof that turned my suspicion into fact. My knees went weak with a sickening combination of vindication and horror. I had been right. It was real. Armed with the toxicology report, Detective Miller obtained a search warrant for our house and for Leo's office computer. I had to let the police into my home, the home that was now my sanctuary, and watch them go through my husband's things. They took his laptop, his work computer, and several items from the garage, including an old, dusty bottle of antifreeze that was tucked away behind some paint cans. The digital forensics team went to work on his computers. It took another week, another 7 days of me holding my breath. Then the second call from Miller came. "We got him," he said, and I could hear the satisfaction in his voice. His work computer. He was smarter than to use the home laptop, but he got sloppy. We found his search history. Ethylene glycol toxicity in canines. Symptoms of antifreeze poisoning in dogs. How much antifreeze is fatal to a dog? He searched for these things multiple times over the past 18 months. And we found a deleted email to a friend from college, a chemist. In it, Leo asks a hypothetical question about the detectability of certain chemical compounds in tissue after death. It was the final nail in the coffin. The motive was on my recording. The physical evidence was in the toxicology report. The premeditation was in his search history. The district attorney's office formally filed felony charges of aggravated animal cruelty against Leo Vance. His arraignment was scheduled. Ms. Albright and I had a strategy meeting. "The criminal case will take precedence," she explained. "A felony conviction will make our divorce case a slam dunk. He will lose any claim to marital assets due to criminal dissipation of funds and gross misconduct. You will get the house and a significant portion of his retirement and investments." The strategy was sound, but it meant I would have to face him in court. I would have to get on the stand and testify. His lawyers would try to rip me apart. They would use my anxiety, my grief, my emotions, everything to discredit me. Dr. Sharma and I spent our sessions preparing for it. We role-played the cross-examination. She played the part of a ruthless defense attorney. "Mrs. Vance, isn't it true you have a history of psychiatric treatment for anxiety?" she would ask, her voice sharp. "Breathe," I would tell myself. "Ground yourself. I have successfully managed an anxiety disorder for many years." "Yes," I would reply, my voice calm and practiced. "Isn't it true you were obsessed with this dog, spending, by your own admission, thousands of dollars on its care?" "I loved my dog very much and provided him with the best possible care, yes." "And isn't it true that your husband, a practical man, was concerned about these exorbitant costs and you resented him for it?" My husband described my love for my dog as a waste of money. I didn't resent his concern. I was horrified by his cruelty. I was getting stronger. I was ready. The pre-trial motions dragged on for months. Leo's lawyers tried everything. They filed motions to suppress the recording, to challenge the search warrant, to dispute the toxicology findings. Each motion was denied by the judge. The evidence was too strong. The trial date was set. Then, 2 weeks before the trial was scheduled to begin, everything changed. I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. It was a doctor from the emergency room at a downtown hospital. "Are you Clara Vance?" she asked. "The wife of Leo Vance?" "I am his soon-to-be ex-wife," I corrected her, my heart starting to pound. "What's happened?" "Ma'am," the doctor said, her voice grave. "Your husband was brought in about an hour hour ago. He collapsed at his office. He's had a massive ischemic stroke. I was silent. The world seemed to stop spinning. A stroke. He's alive, she continued, but the damage is extensive. He's paralyzed on his right side, and he has severe aphasia. He cannot speak or communicate meaningfully. His long-term prognosis is uncertain. I thanked her for the information and hung up the phone. I sat there in the quiet of my kitchen, the same kitchen where I had plotted my fight for justice, and I felt nothing. Not joy, not sadness, just a vast, hollow emptiness. The universe had delivered a plot twist I could never have anticipated. There would be no trial. There would be no public cross-examination. There would be no verdict from a jury of his peers. Legally, I was still his wife. Until the divorce was final, I was his next of kin. I held his medical power of attorney. The irony was so thick I could have choked on it. The man who had tried to strip me of all my power was now utterly, completely powerless, and I was the one in control of his fate. I called Ms. Albright. She was as stunned as I was. The criminal case will be suspended indefinitely, she confirmed. He's medically unfit to stand trial. We will proceed with the divorce on the grounds we already have. This changes the battlefield, Clara, completely. The next day, I went to the hospital. I had to. It was a formal confrontation, just not the one I had prepared for. His family was there, huddled in the hallway outside his private room. His mother, Eleanor, saw me and her face curdled with hatred. "You!" she hissed. "What are you doing here? Haven't you done enough?" "I am still legally his wife, Eleanor," I said. My voice as cold and sterile as the hospital corridor. "I am his medical proxy. The doctors called me. I have every right to be here. In fact, I have more right than any of you." I walked past her into the room. It was a shock. Leo, my arrogant, powerful, meticulously put-together husband, was lying in the bed, looking small and broken. One side of his face drooped. A feeding tube was taped to his nose. His right arm lay limp and useless on the blanket. His eyes, his still lucid eyes, widened when he saw me. They were filled with a terrifying cocktail of fear and rage. He knew. He knew who I was, and he knew who held the power now. His family followed me into the room, standing in a tight, hostile cluster near the door. "The doctors tell me his cognitive function is largely intact," I said, my voice calm, addressing the room but looking directly at Leo. "He can understand everything we're saying. That's good. I have a few things I'd like him to hear." I pulled my phone from my pocket. It was time for the presentation of evidence. "Eleanor, you called me a liar," I said, not looking at her. "You said I was a hysterical, unstable woman. I want you all to hear what a man who is being practical sounds like." I pressed play. The recording of Leo's voice filled the quiet, beeping stillness of the hospital room. "Finally, now we can stop wasting money on that animal." I let it play. His contempt, his cruelty, his financial obsession echoed off the sterile walls. I watched his family's faces. The hostility wavered, replaced by confusion, then dawning horror. I watched Leo. A low, guttural noise of pure frustration escaped his lips, the only sound he could make. When the recording finished, I didn't stop. I pulled a folded piece of paper from my purse. "This," I said, unfolding it, "is a copy of the toxicology report from the police investigation. It found high levels of ethylene glycol in Max's system, antifreeze, administered in small doses over a long period of time to induce kidney failure." I placed the paper on the rolling table over Leo's bed, right in his line of sight. "The police also found Leo's internet search history," I continued, my voice level. "Symptoms of antifreeze poisoning in dogs. He was researching how to kill my dog, his dog, for more than a year. All because he didn't want to pay the vet bills. All because he saw a living, breathing creature who loved us as a bad investment." There was a stunned silence. Eleanor looked like she had been slapped. Leo's father, a man who had always been quiet and aloof, just stared at his son in the bed with a look of utter disgust. The verdict was in, not from a court of law, but from the court of family, the one he had tried to use against me. Their denial was shattered. They knew. They finally knew who he was. I turned my full attention to the man in the bed. I leaned in close so he could see the utter lack of pity in my eyes. The justice would be incomplete, yes. He would never see the inside of a jail cell, but I could give him something else. I could give him the truth. "You took my best friend from me," I said, my voice low and intense. "You watched me cry. You watched me struggle to care for him, knowing you were the cause of his suffering. You held me while I grieved for the creature you murdered, all for money." His left hand, his good hand, clenched into a fist, shaking with impotent fury. His eyes were wide with terror. He was trapped inside his own body, forced to listen to the truth he had tried so hard to bury. "And now, look at you," I whispered, the words I had been holding on to for weeks finally breaking free. "Sick, helpless, dependent, a financial burden. Now you know how it feels to be disposable." I straightened up. I addressed his family one last time. "I will be proceeding with the divorce. Until it is final, I will be making all of his medical decisions. I will follow his living will to the letter. And I happen to know he opted for no extraordinary measures. He always was a practical man." I turned and walked out of the room, leaving them all to stare at the monster they had enabled. I didn't look back. The aftermath was a strange, quiet landscape. The legal battle, which I had braced myself for, evaporated. With Leo incapacitated and the criminal evidence irrefutable, his lawyers advised the family not to contest the divorce. Ms. Albright was ruthless. We settled quickly. I got the house, free and clear. I got a significant portion of the marital assets, his 401k, his investment portfolio. The law saw his criminal actions as a dissipation of marital resources, and I was compensated for it. The justice was financial, not carceral, but it was a form of justice justice nonetheless. I grappled with this in my sessions with Dr. Sharma. Is it wrong that I don't feel bad for him? I asked her one afternoon, the sunlight streaming into her peaceful office. Is it wrong that a part of me feels like this is what he deserved? She looked at me with her usual calm compassion. There is no right or wrong way to feel, Clara, she said. You survived something horrific. Your sense of justice, your moral compass, was shattered by the person who was supposed to be your partner. The legal system was deprived of its chance to deliver a verdict, and so the universe, in its own chaotic way, delivered another. It is not your job to feel pity for the man who systematically tortured you and your pet. Your job now is to heal. And so I focused on healing, rebuilding. The first thing I did after the divorce was final was write a check. It was for a very large sum, made out to the local animal shelter, the one where I had found Max all those years ago. It was to fund a new wing for senior and special needs animals, the ones who were often overlooked, the ones who were considered bad investments. It would be called Max's Place. It felt like the only fitting tribute. I slowly began to reclaim my home. I packed up every trace of Leo, his clothes, his books, his pretentious single malt scotches. I donated it all. I painted the walls, bought new furniture, and rearranged every room until it felt like mine and mine alone. I found a new job, a part-time position at a local library, surrounded by books and quiet. It was a peaceful, grounding rhythm that my soul desperately needed. I continued my therapy, slowly untangling the knots of trauma, rebuilding my sense of self-worth that Leo had spent years eroding. I learned to trust my own perceptions again, to believe in my own reality without needing external validation. The process was slow, with good days and bad. Sometimes a sound or a smell would transport me back to those dark days, and the panic would rise. But now I had the tools to manage it. I could breathe. I could ground myself. I could call Aunt Carol, my unwavering rock. I established permanent, non-negotiable boundaries. I sent one final brief email to Eleanor. It said, "My new life does not have room for you or any member of your family. Do not contact me again." I blocked every avenue through which they could reach me. I cut them out of my life like the cancer they were. It was a final act of self-preservation, a declaration of my independence. One Saturday, months later, I found myself back at the animal shelter, not to make a donation, but to volunteer. I spent the afternoon cleaning cages, washing food bowls, and walking dogs who were desperate for a moment of kindness. The director, a kind woman who knew my story, approached me near the end of my shift. "There's someone I'd like you to meet," she said, and led me to a quiet kennel in the back. Inside was a scruffy, one-eyed terrier mix, cowering in the corner. His tag said his name was Gus. He had been rescued from a hoarding situation and was terrified of everything. I sat on the floor of the kennel, not looking at him, just being present in the space. After a long time, he crept forward, his nose twitching. He tentatively licked my hand. My scarred heart cracked open, just a little, to let in a sliver of light. He wasn't a replacement for Max. No one could ever be. He was something new, a fellow survivor, a new beginning. I looked at this small, broken creature, and I saw a reflection of myself. Scarred, yes, but resilient, and so ready to heal. I knew, in that quiet, profound moment, that I was going to be okay. My life was my own, my future was unwritten, and it was filled with hope.